Hi, my name is Valerie and this is Reading Randomness, and today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in January and February. I only read one book in January, but 6 books in February, which is why I'm kind of combining these 2 months together. So this may be a bit of a long video since it is 7 books, but hang on until the end and I will be drawing 2 more books from my little bag of books that I've owned for a really long time but haven't read yet. So stay tuned for that. But first, the 7 books I have read so far this year. So the first book that I read this year in January was The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. So I heard about this book through BookTube because I heard quite a few people on BookTube talking about how fantastic it was and how much they loved it. And I've been wanting to read more sci-fi, so I decided to give this book a shot. And I'm so glad I did. It is delightful and lovely and fascinating, and I cannot wait to read the sequel. So this book is about a crew on a spaceship, and their job is to go around creating wormholes, basically, so that other spaceships can get from point A to point B faster. And at the beginning of the book, there's a new crew member, so we kind of get introduced to the rest of the crew through her eyes, which is nice. And I don't know, just every character in this book was just so wonderful and interesting and vivid and detailed, and none of them were one-dimensional, and it was just fantastic. The crew is incredibly diverse, which I loved, and I think the characters in this book are really what make it so wonderful. While this book does go into, the exploring this new universe that this book takes place in and its politics and all of that, which I also loved and thought was fascinating. I think what this book is really about is the connections between these crew members and them working together as a team and supporting one another, and I loved it. I would highly recommend this book to sci-fi fans in particular. If you like sci-fi, you will probably love this, but even if you don't love sci-fi, I would recommend giving this book a shot. Yes, there are spaceships and really cool technology, for example, nanobots that brush your teeth, but, all of that was awesome. But in addition to that, it's just some really fantastic characters, living and working together and growing together. And I think that was what was really the heart of this book. So I gave this book 5 stars on Goodreads. The second book that I read this year, and the first book that I read in February, was This Is How You Lose Her by Junot Diaz. I have been wanting to read this book for quite a while, and a book club that I recently joined decided that they were going to read it, so I was excited to finally read it. And I don't know why I was, particularly so excited to read it. I think I had just heard so many good things about the author and the book in particular, and the cover looked really cool, and it seemed like it would be kind of a sweet, epic love story or something. And I typically am not a romance fan at all. Usually romance plots in books make me roll my eyes, but I thought that, maybe this was going to be a romance plot in a book that didn't make me roll my eyes at it. And those of you who have read this book are probably already laughing because to say that I did not like the main character of this book would be a vast understatement. The main character in this book is named Junior, and he is basically a terrible person. He's basically a serial cheater. Like, he just cheats on all his girlfriends incessantly. And basically treats women like sexual objects, and then is like sad that he's single and alone. Like, I really, despite the fact that in some of the stories in this book we see that he had, a bit of a rough childhood, fairly rough childhood, as far as concerns his love life and his, being alone and single at 40 because he kept cheating on women, I'm not sad. I don't feel bad for him at all. And I feel like the author thinks I should, and I don't. So this book is basically a series of short stories talking about or showing different moments from this man's life, usually involving him cheating on a girl. And I would say that there are only two stories in the whole book that I actually enjoyed. One was the story about when Junior and his family moved to the US from the Dominican Republic, because I thought it was a really interesting and enlightening portrayal of the experience of immigration and being isolated in a country that you've just moved to. So I thought that one was pretty well done. And then there was another story that was from the point of view of a woman and wasn't actually about Junior at all. And I liked that one because, you know, in that one, the woman actually got a voice and wasn't treated like an object. So, so those two I enjoyed. So because of the two stories that I did enjoy, I ended up giving this 2 stars on Goodreads. But that was the most I could do. The rest of the book was almost painful to read because I really did not like the main character. The next book that I read in February was the book that I drew from my bag of books that I've had for a really long time and haven't read yet, which was A Rogue's Life by Wilkie Collins. So I've had it for a really long time and hadn't read it yet, which is sad because it's only like 126 pages. So Wilkie Collins is one of my favorite authors, so I was very excited to read this book. So this extremely short 19th century novella, I guess you really would call it, is about a rogue named Frank Softly. Frank comes from a somewhat wealthy family. His dad is a doctor, and the book is basically him not wanting to follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor himself, and deciding to kind of get into being a con artist and taking on other kinds of odd jobs and getting into a lot of shenanigans along the way. It was definitely entertaining at times, but unfortunately it did get boring. Like I said, the book is only 126 pages, but it felt like it was never going to end at times. This was certainly not the worst book I've ever read, but like I said, Wilkie Collins is one of my favorite authors, so I had kind of high expectations. So compared to his better and more well-known works like The Woman in White and The Moonstone, this one really didn't quite compare. So I would highly recommend the author Wilkie Collins, just I would not recommend that you start with this book. I would recommend that you start with The Woman in White, for example, which is a fantastic book. But yeah, sadly, I was very disappointed that I didn't enjoy this book as much as I had hoped I would. So I ended up giving it 2 stars on Goodreads. After 2 duds, let's be real, in February, I was very much hoping that I would find a book that I enjoyed this year other than The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I found it in The Pale Horse by Agatha Christie. As you probably know, I read a ton of Agatha Christie books, or have read a ton of Agatha Christie books, and I've been interested in reading this one because it is the only book that features Mrs. Oliver that does not also feature Hercule Poirot. So Mrs. Oliver is a character that pops up every now and then in Hercule Poirot books, and she's basically supposed to be Agatha Christie herself. She's a mystery writer. She's kind of an older woman, and yeah, she's clearly supposed to be Agatha Christie. But she's in this one, and Hercule Poirot is not, which I thought was interesting. She doesn't feature in this nearly as much as I thought she would. Like, I thought she was going to be the main character, like the detective, but she was not. The main character is named Mark Easterbrook. I did not remember that. So Mark is a writer also, and at the beginning of the book, he is in a cafe and he sees 2 young women having a cat fight, and one of them like rips hair out of the other girl's hair, around the other girl's head, and you know, he's like, okay, that was weird. And then a few days later, he sees an obituary for the girl who lost the cat fight. Not because of the cat fight, just from, you know, natural causes. So he's like, okay, that's really weird. So then separately from all this, which explains the cover, which I did not understand when I first started reading this book, separately, we see an old priest who takes confession from a dying woman in an apartment, and that same night is found bludgeoned to death with a list of names in his shoe. So eventually clues start to piece together as to what's going on, and the way that Agatha Christie pieces these clues together in this book is particularly good, I have to say. It kind of leads you on a trail of trying to figure out how all of this is connected and what is going on, and why this man was killed. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. The reason it's called The Pale Horse is because eventually the clues kind of end up leading to this old inn called The Pale Horse, where 3 women live in this small village who are kind of rumored to be witches, basically. So kind of goes more into a little bit supernatural ideas, which she does in a few of her books. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. So again, this might be a good book to read if you've read some Agatha Christie books, like maybe her more popular ones, but haven't read any other ones. I would recommend The Pale Horse. So I gave this book 4 stars on Goodreads. So I have an interesting story about how I discovered the next book that I read. So I don't tend to read a lot of books at random. I tend to read books that I've found on Goodreads, or books that people have recommended on BookTube or on Twitter or by friends. I don't typically go to the library or a bookstore and just pick out a book and go, oh, that looks interesting, and read it. It's just not typically what I do. So one day a few months ago, I was at the library and I happened to be browsing the mystery section, and I stumbled across a very colorful spine and pulled it out and discovered that there is a book, a series, a mystery book series that exists in the world that involves a retired Indian detective who owns a baby elephant. And I needed this book in my life. Unfortunately, the book I had pulled off the shelf was the second book in the series, so I asked for the first book for Christmas, and I got it. And it is called The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra, and there's a baby elephant on the cover, and it makes me so happy. So I don't know why the baby elephant amuses me so much. Like, elephants aren't really like my favorite animal. Like, they're cute, but I like, red pandas and penguins, maybe a bit more, but it's baby elephant. Ah! This book was exactly as charming as I had hoped it would be. Basically, on the day of his retirement, Inspector Chopra is unexpectedly, hence the title, given a baby elephant by his uncle, who's kind of odd. Throughout the book, poor Inspector Chopra is trying to, cope with what to do with himself now that he's retired, because, being a detective has been his life for decades, and he's also, can't let go of this last case that he had to put aside when the day he retired, because his supervisors thought it was an accident, but he thinks it was a murder. And as all of this is going on, and he's trying to figure out this case and figure out what to do with his life now that he's retired, all of this is going on, and he also has to try and figure out how to take care of a baby elephant that his uncle has randomly given him. Because he and his wife and his mother-in-law live in an apartment on like the 15th or 20th floor or something, so it's not like he has living conditions that are exactly conducive to raising a baby elephant. This book is delightful and adorable, and granted, the case that he's trying to solve is rather dark and sad, and it's a little sad to see him, trying to cope with feeling kind of useless, after he retires. But also, I hate to harp on this too much, but there's also a baby elephant. So there's that. I obviously thoroughly enjoyed this book. It was super fun, and I'm very excited to read the sequel. I don't know what the sequel is called, but I'm sure I will read it at some point, and we'll talk about it here. So that is The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra by Vaseem Khan, and I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads. The next book that I read in February was The Couple Next Door by Shari Lapena, I believe. And I got this for my birthday last summer and finally got around to reading it. And I don't know what to make of this book. I both liked and hated it. This book is about a couple next door, surprisingly. It is about a couple who are named Anne and Marco Conti, and they live in New York, and they have a 6-month-old baby girl. And at the beginning of the book, their baby is kidnapped while they are at a dinner party next door without the baby. Their babysitter had canceled on them, and, you know, they thought it would just be a totally acceptable plan to take the baby monitor next door to their neighbor's house and leave the baby, and then just go check on the baby, like, periodically. Clearly that did not work out for them. The rest of the book is a wild ride of plot twists and turns, some of which I saw coming and were kind of obvious, and some of which I did not see coming at all. But there were a couple things I didn't care for so much about the book. One is that I feel like the writing style maybe wasn't the best. I'm not usually a very good judge of that. In fact, I tend to prefer books not be super flowery. But with this book, it seemed like maybe it wasn't quite flowery enough. It was quite straightforward of like, well, this happened, and then Anne did this, and then Marco did this, and like, I don't know, it was maybe not the best. And then the other thing that I didn't like about it, I can't talk about because it's spoilery. But if you've read the book and you're interested in knowing what I didn't like about it, I will post a link in the description to my Goodreads review of this book. And I've got it under a spoiler tag thing in the review so that you can read about that, because there was something about this book that I really quite hated. But like I said, it was still enjoyable to read, you know, trying to figure out all the plot twists. I love mysteries. You can't go wrong with a mystery most of the time. So yeah, I enjoyed this book for the most part, so I decided to give it 3 stars on Goodreads. And the last book that I read in February was Time of Death by Susan Wittig Albert. And yes, that is time as in T-H-Y-M-E. Cozy mysteries really love their puns. I had wanted to read this for a long time as well. I'd read another book by the same author, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But I ended up reading this as a buddy read on Goodreads through a group on Goodreads, which was great. I will say, I think I was a bit disappointed by this book. It was not quite as good as I had hoped it would be. I wouldn't say it was bad, but it just wasn't quite as good as I had hoped it would be. It was very 90s. It was written in like 92, or published in like 92. It's very 90s, very Texas, because it takes place in small town Texas. And I'm pretty sure the sheriff was named Bubba or something. Like, it was a little too on the nose. Yeah, Bubba. It was a little too on the nose at times, but I did enjoy it. It just wasn't my favorite, and I don't know if I'll continue with the series. I think the reason that I was quite as disappointed as I was in this book is that I read another book by the same author. I can't think of the name of the other book. I'll put it here somewhere. Or in the description, but it was the first in a series of books that she wrote that are mysteries also, but they take place like in the early 1900s, and they involve Beatrix Potter and her pets, and like the local animals, and the animals talk, and at least to each other. And it was cute and corny, and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't sure, like, it was a little corny for me to really want to continue with the rest of the series. But the first chapter in that book was like phenomenal. It was this beautiful description of like a sunrise and like the beginning of a new day and like this beautiful scene. And then the chapter culminated in the discovery of a murder victim. And it was just beautiful. And I remember like pausing after I finished that chapter and being like, whoa, like this person can write. And I don't feel like I felt that, you know, level of writing in any part of this book, which was sad, because I really liked that first chapter of that other book, and I was hoping that this would be more of that. But this was just a pretty standard cozy mystery. So if you like cozy mysteries, you will probably thoroughly enjoy this book. So the plot of this book is that, like I said, it takes place in small town Texas, and the main character is a woman named China Bales, which is an odd name. She is a former lawyer who owns a shop that sells like herbs and spices and things, hence the name Time of Death. And obviously someone in the small town dies, and it looks like it was a suicide, but one of China's friends thinks that it was murder, and things escalate from there when secrets start to come out about the woman who died and about others, you know, that she knows. So, the plot was interesting, and there were some plot twists I didn't see coming, and I did not guess who the murderer was, which I think is always a good sign because it kind of shows that it wasn't super obvious. So, so yeah, I enjoyed it for the most part, but like I said, cozy mysteries typically are not my favorite kind of mysteries, at least not this kind of cozy. I love like Agatha Christie and that kind of cozy, but modern cozies, just I don't know why they're not my thing. But if you like cozy mysteries, I would recommend this one. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. Alright, and last but not least, now that I have talked about all the books that I've read so far this year, like I said, I'm going to draw 2 books out of here. This is a bunch of books, that many, that I've had since like 2014, 2015 and haven't read yet. So we're going to draw 2 out of here, one to make up for not doing it in February and one for March. So let's see how this goes. So book number 1. Let's see what we got. Ooh, okay, so we've got The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. I am excited to read that. It's a nonfiction book. Hang on, I gotta go get it to remember what it's about. I am excited because I forgot that this was in that bag, so that I'd had it this long. So, The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. I think it's about, like, the World's Fair and also a serial killer. So, should be interesting. I've been wanting to read this, so I'm very excited. And one more book. Book number 2. Oh gosh. Okay, Stormfront by Jim Butcher, which is right here. So, a couple people have recommended this series to me. I have since seen mixed reviews on it. From what I understand, it's sort of like a fantasy / mystery. It's like a detective who's a wizard, but it's sort of like noir or something. So, okay. I've been wanting to give this a shot, because if I like it, there's a bunch of them. But this is book 1 in the series, Stormfront, book 1 of the Dresden Files. And actually, I did read another book by this author. He has like a fantasy book series for kind of young adult-ish. Furies of Calderon or something like that. I read the first book in that series and I liked it. I just never kept going with it. So, this month in March, I will be reading, among other books hopefully, The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson and Stormfront by Jim Butcher, and I'm pretty excited about it. So, to finally get these off of my TBR shelf. So, that's all I have for today. If you have read any of these lovely books, or not so lovely books, please let me know in comments what you thought of them. And until next time, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.